Let's talk about leadership.
Okay.
We have had a great career in project management and consulting and strategy. What differentiates a good leader?
So I'm fond of telling folks that we are the sum of our experiences. And so we've known each other in kind of my second professional life. My first professional life was a career in the Army. And so that really shapes my perspective on leadership. And it's something that I'm pretty passionate about because I view it as an apprenticeship in leading people in organizations for 20 years. So from my perspective, I think three key things, world according to Curtis, is empathy, vision, and discipline. So core to that is a distinction between management and leadership, in the sense that management is coordinating a group of people who are predisposed to work together. They show up with the resources and they want to get everything done. And so they are willing partners in it. Leadership can be a bit more messy. Management, I think, is a subset of leadership, but I define leadership as motivating a disparate group of people with different backgrounds, histories, perspectives, views, levels of expertise, visions, motivating them all to come together and achieve a common goal. And the best way that I've seen to make that work and that I have sought to make that work is by getting to know each one of your people to figure out how to motivate and relate to each one of them. And you can only relate to people if you have some level of empathy with them. So that's why that's important. You've got to figure out how to get the best out of people in sometimes the worst of circumstances. And that's going to be different for every person. So you got to figure out how to talk to each member of your team and how to make them feel like they're valued and important so that they can show up in their most genuine way and really get excited about what's in front of them and go for that. Which is the segue to vision. You got to put something in front of them for them to achieve. And so leaders got to be able to think through, what do we want to do? And I look at organizational activities in two ways. Somebody's got to look up and out, figure out where we're going, what we're doing, why we're doing it. That's kind of the strategy part. And then someone's got to be focused on the down and in activities of getting things done, making things happen, the core competency of an organization. And that's kind of the tactics or even the operations of it. But it's all based on that vision of where we're going and what we're doing. Because if you don't have a sense of where you're going, like when we get in a car, we didn't know where we're going. And a leader's got to be able to map that out. Now, that level of vision has got to be commensurate with their level of leadership activities. You don't need your average line manager to be able to wax poetic to the CEO about market conditions. But they do need to know where their team needs to be and what they need to be doing. And then the last part is discipline. And that's self-discipline and that's organizational discipline. So you now got this group of people who, if you can relate to them and get good things out of them, they are jazzed about showing up to work and making stuff happen. You've got them all focused on what you want to do with your vision. But then you got to have the self-discipline to be able to use those resources as best you can to achieve those goals, to treat them with respect so that they do likewise for you and with each other, and to make sure that you identify your metrics and that you stay on track in the task with what you want to do. So to me, those are the three things that a good leader needs to succeed.
And I'm especially interested in talking about the messy. So a lot of times we see clients, and we've worked with clients that have a project and they don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
They don't have the experience, they don't have the expertise, they're in a bind, they're stuck. They don't know how to move forward.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the difference between management of a project like that and leadership of a project like that.
Yeah, we deal largely in the change space, but people don't tend to think of it in the change space, right? So ongoing business concerns, people know what they're doing. They've got their roles, they've got their responsibilities, they've got their tasks, they've got their systems established, and they can show up to work, expectations are set, and they can just continue on that path, kind of cruise control. Well, you create a project when you're trying to achieve something new, and you're trying to break some new ground, you're trying to do something different, and you want to dedicate resources to achieve that goal. Well, that means change in some way. And that means going beyond what you presently know, what you're presently built for, and trying to create new ways or new approaches to follow through on something. And that's where people get lost, because not everybody has an entrepreneurial mindset to think differently. Not everybody has desire to operate differently. And not everyone understands what it takes to either motivate folks to do things differently or to build something from new. Because quite often we show up in spaces in which things are curated for us and they're ready made, show up and just get to work. And so that causes a lot of problems for folks, a lot of points of friction. And so that's when it gets messy and they don't know how to deal with all of those things and they need help in figuring it out. And when that happens, yeah, it's best to call some folks who are comfortable with change, who are comfortable with figuring things out, who are comfortable with challenging ideas or challenging assumptions, doing discovery to find out, okay, what's really at play here? Let's identify the problem, let's deconstruct it, let's find its pieces and its parts, what the levers are that are going to influence outcomes, and let's figure out how we can rebuild this or build a new mousetrap in a better way.
And I love what you said about entrepreneurial mindset, the ability to be agile and flexible and like problem solve as you go, because it's not reading a playbook. It's not black and white. And I think a lot of times we get lost in the gray space. And the gray space feels scary. It feels uncertain. And because, especially when you're with leaders that are great operators, they are great managers, they're great people leaders, and they're trying to implement something they have zero experience in.
Yeah.
And that is so oftentimes where I see those leaders fall short. And it's not because of their ability to lead. They're great leaders, they're great operators, they're driving great results for their teams. It's just they don't know how to do it. And they don't know how to navigate in that gray. And also thought something that was really interesting is the side of empathy. I think it's a good balance of empathy, but managing through resistance, which is the people skills of complex projects. And for example, a big organizational change, maybe your people's job descriptions are going to change. Maybe their roles and responsibilities are going to look very different than what they signed up for. I didn't sign up for this. And sometimes those leaders just cave. Well, no, maybe they don't need to do all of that stuff. No, let's keep them here. And they have like too much empathy, but really like they just don't know how to navigate through that resistance. Yeah. So let's talk about that in your experience with resistance versus empathy.
Yeah, it's tough. You know, I'm in a role right now in which I'm leading a new department. We are building a new book of activities, and we're responsible with kind of three things: to create new processes, to challenge our existing activities, and to make new things happen. And you know what people don't like? They don't like to be challenged. They're skeptical of change, and they really don't like new stuff, right? So there's a whole lot of resistance that we face in that. And you know, if we put our old, speaking as I use the term recovering consultants, if we put well, you still are, I'm recovering. So if I put on my change management cap, there's the ProSci way of thinking and there's the Kotter way of thinking. And Kotter talks about three types of people in a change scenario. And I think there's really more like five, but we'll go with champions and stakeholders and I think resistors. And I think there are a couple more that are out there as well. And the hard part for resistors is, again, it goes back to people like what they know. They like to know that, in general, they like to know that here's what I do. Now, so perhaps more than ever, with all the information that's available to us, they can do their research online, they can read a host of books, and they can build in their minds mental models of how they think something's supposed to be, what their role is supposed to be in it, and there's security in that, without a doubt, in knowing and believing that you know what you're supposed to do and getting after that. And it's uncomfortable for people a lot of times, particularly in the United States, particularly in certain socioeconomic strata, particularly in business and with executives, to branch out into new territory because it's unknown and there's a lot fewer controls that are in place. And yeah, they're hesitant to do a lot of those things. So when it comes to change, you've got to convince people, well, first off, you've got to recognize we have to do something different. And that's not always welcome for a lot of people. Then you've got to get your group together, rally together and say, we're gonna go through this together. And that's not easy to do. And it is almost always easier to fall back to what you know, because that's your comfort, than to go forward into the unknown, because it's dark and scary in the unknown. And I know what the known is. I've worked in that for however many years. We've used these processes for however many years. I know all of those things. Don't know what's here. And go back to that entrepreneurial mindset. Don't necessarily know how to build where to go from there, because it was all built for us. I don't know how to challenge thoughts and thinking. Our daughter, my wife and mine and my wife's daughter, recently graduated college, and along the way, I can't help. They hate me in the sense that I never pass up a teachable moment, right? So everything becomes a lecture. Just getting coffee. It's like, if you make it yourself, you could save so much more money. Let's do the math on it. I'm like, you're killing me, Dad. But so along the way, and talking to her about group work and leaning in with folks, we've talked about the gray space, and we've talked about challenging people. And I've said to her, you'll get to a point where you ask questions and nobody says anything. That's that gray space. You have to lean into that gray space, and you got to have the uncomfortable conversations, because that's where people are at their edge of what they know, what they like. They're not saying anything because they don't want to go into that space. You got to move them into it. And part of it might be sitting with the silence at first and asking, okay, does anybody have an answer here? Where do you all think we should go here? Who might be best positioned to do it? And I like to think in terms of kind of triangulating on who's got expertise in this, who has resources in this, who has decision-making authority in this. Where I can get the best overlap of those three things, that's probably the person that I'm going to look at first and say, you think you guys should probably take a swing at this? And that's a way to kind of move people in a direction, I think, in an empathetic fashion, because you recognize that they've got some hesitancy in doing it. At the same time, we need to keep moving forward. So let's open with questions, because as a leader or as a consultant, I don't have the answers. We're on this journey together. So let's open with some questions, and let's come up with some ideas, and let's not be afraid to put anything on the wall and then work through the feasibility of it to see where we can go. And I think that is, to get back to your larger question of empathy and how do you work through resistance, that's when you have time. That is probably a beneficial way to approach it. Now, there are times that you don't have a whole lot of time. And so when you don't have a whole lot of time, you've got to dial down the empathy level a bit, and you've got to be more directive. And sometimes it means coming into a group and saying, look, here's what we got to do. We got to figure this out. We got to knuckle down, and we got to drive through. That's where your relationships really come into play. If you've spent time previously building relationships, demonstrating that empathy, having mutual respect, such that the folks that you're working with have confidence that you have their best interests in mind, or that you give them space to come up with ideas, to disagree with you, to have some healthy conflict, that you will hear them out. If that is the history of your relationship together, then they will kind of instinctively, intuitively know that if you're coming to them and saying, I need this right now, but they need to recognize you're dialing down the empathy because of pressures that you're facing. And you can use some of that social capital that you've built in your time together, in your relationship. At that point, you cash in a little bit of it, they give you some more grace, some more leeway, and they lean in because they see that either you need it as an individual, or you recognize that we need it as a team, and we need to move forward in that way.
So I like what you were saying about navigating in the gray space. And we've talked a little bit about a couple of things, right? Within that gray space, the unknown, the change, what's different, what's not status quo, what's your growth edge, where you want your business to go. We've talked about how you manage that through empathy, through the soft people skills, through leadership. We talked a little bit about solutioning. And I think that was really interesting because it's not a playbook. It's not, I can't just open a new hospital with the same project plan, with the same tasks, the same checklists, the toolkit. Right. And we see so many times clients come to us and say, hey, can we just get a toolkit? Can you help us build a toolkit? I'm like, we can give you a playbook, we can give you a toolkit, we can give you all the fancy tools and templates that you want, but you're missing that solutioning part.
Yeah.
It's a new hospital opening isn't a new hospital opening in Florida, and it's not the same new hospital opening in California or wherever. So that brings me to my next question, which is around the discipline part, which is, I think, a very interesting conversation we can have with your background around the competency. So the competency of project management.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the competency of change management in the gray space. We've talked about the competency of solutioning in the gray space. Let's talk about the competency and discipline of project management.
Yeah. So project management, first off, is kind of a Rorschach test, right? In the sense that you put it out there and it means different things to different people. And it really is executed differently depending on industry. So there's some industries in which you've got a set of resources, a cohort of resources, and it's the project manager who is lead for pulling everything together and achieving the goal. In that sense, they may be a bit of a business owner. Think of construction or something along those lines. Then you have other industries like project management and business, that consulting quite often that comes alongside to support a business owner in advancing the goals of that business owner and creating a framework, a work breakdown structure and the like, so that there's a pathway and we can gauge our advancement from A to Z and keep us on track, identify risks and the rest. So let's talk about the latter, because I think that's probably what's most relevant here. And there is a lot of stock and a lot of value placed in templates and credentials. Those things are important, but they're not everything.
So credentials. Tell me specifically, Curtis, what credentials are you referencing?
Well, the credentials can be a project management professional, PMP, or it could be short of that, or it could be a change management title, or a Scrum Master, or a Lean Six Sigma belt ranking. And credentials and background are important in terms of establishing for individuals and cohorts and populations of folks working in the same professional space common foundational frameworks and language.
Yes, I agree.
Right? We all need that. However, it is not the end all be all. And a credential is a license to learn more. Right? So when we graduate high school, when we graduate college, our graduation ceremonies are known as commencements, because we are starting a new journey. And anyone who has gotten any kind of certification, whether it's a driver's license or a pilot's license, or anything in which they've moved beyond the work and the education and they are now in the practical application of it, if they were to look backwards, retrospectively, they would probably all say, I did so much learning after I got my credential, because I had to learn how to apply all the things that I learned in the academic setting, the textbooks, the templates, all those skills, and I had to apply them in the real world. And the real world is messy, and the real world does not easily, self-categorize. And there's the people dynamic. There is life throwing you curveballs. All of those things don't easily align with perhaps the more sanitized things case studies that we reviewed in class. So the real learning happens after the credential, where you got to learn how to take the templates that you learned and apply them to real life. And one of my early jobs as an Army officer was as a battalion intelligence officer. And so in that, it is study the patterns of your adversary, the enemy that you are seeking to engage, and try and think through, okay, what are they going to do on the battlefield so that we can be prepared and build a plan against their most likely endeavors. And this is not new. I think anybody who plays chess does this. Anybody who's doing business deals does this kind of thing. right? But it's not always the same. There is a template, there's a pattern of behavior, there is a probability of activities, but you kind of take that template. I think of it as X's and O's, like on a football coach mapping out X's and O's on a piece of glass, like this. You take that and then you overlay it with using that military framework, your map, and you see, okay, how can this fit with the geography that's laid out here? And the map is the situation. That's the reality that you're facing. The template is, best case scenario, what might happen. And you've got to figure out how to pull those things together. That's not always easy. The more often you do it, the better you'll get at it. You're still going to be wrong plenty of times, but you'll get better at hopefully understanding where you're wrong, understanding how it might be different, understanding how things might be different, and giving yourself more space to be wrong and accounting for that. And it is that experience being wrong and learning from that leads to more expertise. And so ultimately, going back to the credential, that's just the first step. That's opening the door. That is the commencement of your journey towards learning. And ultimately, through experience of facing new challenges, trying to figure out how to pull together your templates and your models and your past history with what's in front of you, that's where experience and expertise grow. And what people are challenged with so often is holding on tightly to assumptions, either of how they think things are, how they think things should be, how they think a solution should look. What I encourage people to do, and what I try to do myself, is make no assumptions, to challenge everything, to start discovery anew every time I walk in a door and every time I start a new project. And it's important, and I believe that that's important, because when you do that, you're deconstructing the environment you're in, and you're starting from zero and revalidating everything, right? What is at play? Why do we think that's at play? Let's get down to, the fundamental granular aspects. And it's important to challenge everything. And that's uncomfortable for people. And a lot of people dismiss it. Well, we already know this. I'm not certain that we do. And we run risk of continuing down this pathway of trying to build a new methodology, build a new process, if it's on a faulty assumption. So is that a risk that is worth bearing? What is the incremental expense of taking a little bit more time to challenge those assumptions? There's a lot more upside to challenging those assumptions and ensuring that you're on a solid foundation in terms of your knowledge set than there is with holding on to the assumptions and moving forward. So the downside risk there is much greater than the upside risk of the challenge.
And also there's a lot to talk about around risk. So when you're managing multi-million-dollar projects, $100 million, $200, $300 million projects, if you don't properly if you make assumptions, you're going to be making mistakes on your projects. You're going to be costing your organization hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I've seen it. I've literally seen on our budget line items, $200,000, $300,000, $200,000 mistakes because of assumptions, and they're not challenging it. And I think, at its core, the instances that I've known that there have been gross monetary risk. And at that point, it's no longer a risk. Right? The mistake's already done. You've already done it. You've already spent the dollars covering up your mistakes.
It's an issue at that point, right?
It is an issue at that point that you've got to, go talk to your CFO. Hey, I need $300,000. But beside that, it's also, a lot of those mistakes and risks and issues can be mitigated through proper discipline, through proper solutioning, through proper problem solving, through expertise that you're bringing in. And so often I see we're not talking about those risks, and those are real things. It's a real impact to your organization. It's not just a missed deadline. It's not just an overlooked task. It's a monetary value that you are consequently incurring on your company. And I think at its core, when you are assessing who has those competencies to be able to avoid risk And it's going to come down to looking within your organization, who is going to be a leader that is going to be able to successfully mitigate my risk to the organization and successfully achieve deadlines under budget, on time, schedule. And I will see the first person that is often looked in that room is someone that says project manager at the end of their job description. Let's talk about, and I'm going to challenge the status quo on this a little bit, because I think so often we see organizations that will bring in a project manager, and I'll say project manager, PMP certified. They've got the title, they've got the credentials, but they don't have all the other competencies that we've talked about. And you don't know it, right? Because you just see it on paper. And your whole organization is, maybe you've got a project management organization within your company, a whole business entity of project managers. Tell me why a project manager, a PMP, may not be the right fit for a $300, $200, $100 million project.
Well, for anything that's going to be achieved within any organization, there has to be an owner. There has to be somebody who is, or a group of people, who are going to be responsible and accountable for that project, let's say, or that effort, or that business interest or endeavor. Go back to one of my early statements about strategy being up and out, and tactics and to an extent operations being down and in, operations between the two, how we're going to do it. I think project management sweet spot is the down and in. The business owner's responsibility is the up and out. So I've grown up professionally with a model that generally consists of some kind of dyad. And there is someone in that dyad who's looking up and out. Where are we going? They're accountable, they're responsible. And they're very well partnered with a trusted agent who is managing the down and in. They work together constantly. They talk to each other regularly. And in the business environment, if you're going to use project managers, that should be your business owner and your project manager. The business owner is the person who ultimately has to own this when the project is done. All right, so a project is just advancing us from one place to another with achievement of a set of ideas or goals. Then, at the end, you're going to have implementation, and then continuation of the effort. It's now become one of your ongoing business concerns. And that project management, those books close, but the effort continues in some integrated fashion. The business owner is the one who's got to wrap arms around that integrated fashion at the end. So there's always got to be somebody who is looking up and out to say, okay, what does this need to look like when we get done? So if any organization tosses a project to a project manager and says, figure this out, drive us along the pathway, that's the first big mistake. They need to have a business owner who's saying, I'm going to own this. We're going to make this happen. I need a project manager to come alongside me to help me do this. And we are going to be partners in moving this forward. And then I would say you also need a change manager along with a project manager, because it's not enough. And if not a change manager, somebody needs to be looking at how you manage the change. Because the project is building the capability, creating the new processes, developing the new tools, or completing the new capital project, right? It's done, it's packaged. How do we use it? Where's our stuff? How do we do this? That's all the change part. So you can complete a project and walk away, but if you haven't integrated the results of that project into your everyday business activities, if you haven't done the change management, then your project is probably going to devolve back to where you were, because you had patterns established with how you did things before you engaged in this project. And unless you make deliberate effort to break previous habits, whether they're good or bad, and develop new habit patterns that align with this project that you have completed, so that you can make optimal use of this new benefit that should accrue to you from engaging in this project, then you're likely not going to get the results that you're looking for and ultimately potentially retrograde back to where you were. So this is my very long answer to your short question, but you've got to have a business owner who is going to wrap arms around and take the up and out view. They should be partnered with the project manager who will help them progress these activities along. And there should be great consideration given to change management aspects to ensure that you properly integrate the realized results of your project into your ongoing business activities.
You know, when we're talking about like the business owner versus the project manager conversation, a lot of times like the business owner is just, the real business owner of that project is going to be too busy. They don't have the time to be managing a full-time project. And of course, that's where Trust Business Consulting can come in and help and facilitate that conversation. But Curtis, thank you so much. It was a really good conversation. You can find Curtis and I both on LinkedIn. So looking forward to connecting.
Thanks. Always a good time.
Thanks, Curtis.
Yeah.